Well, first of all, like I said, it is wonderful to see you all here. I really appreciate you all giving up some, well, not, I can't say giving up because it's for such a good thing, but some of your Thursday night to be here. Sorry, one of my Zoom was just freezing, but we are good. All right. So, I think most of you, if not all of you here, are members of Beyond the Book, which is wonderful. If you are not, just a very brief overview that Beyond the Book is a monthly online book club featuring live video interviews with best-selling authors like Nicola Yoon, like we're getting tonight, as well as other perks like books delivered straight to your door or device every single month, ebook, physical book, audiobook, no shipping fees. Also, if you hear noise in the background, that is my dog drinking water very loudly. And in addition to the books coming straight to your door, there's also themed puzzles, playlists, and recipes every month provided in part by the author. And there's an active community on Discord where you can talk to other book club members and kind of share your thoughts on the reading. I think it's really fun. I hope you guys are enjoying it. Anyone who is members are enjoying it so far. We have a really great lineup coming up. Our October book is this really, really fun, funny, and smart rom-com that is coming to members next week on October 1st. So if you're not a member and you want to be for that one, please sign up and you'll get a copy of that book sent straight to you. And then the last little note is that, as I reminded you guys in the emails, if you join Beyond the Book and refer a friend to join, you will get a referral bonus. You will get 1 month of your membership free. So yeah, thank you for being here again. And now let's get into what you're all here for, the actual interview with Nicola Yoon. Well, Nicola, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thanks for having me, and nice to see you guys. Nice. I saw someone say they liked the recipe in the book club this month, so that's awesome.
How can you not like an ice cream recipe? You know, you have to
Right.
be crazy.
Yes.
For anyone who does not know, Nicola Yoon right here is the #1 New York Times best-selling author of books like Instructions for Dancing, Everything, Everything, The Sun is Also a Star, a co-author of Blackout and Whiteout, and of course, One of Our Kind, which we're going to discuss tonight. She is a National Book Award finalist, a Michael L. Prince Honor Book recipient, a Coretta Scott King New Talent Award winner, and this is very cool, the first Black woman to hit #1 on the New York Times Young Adult bestseller list. 2 of her novels have been made into movies. You might have seen them. She's also the co-publisher of her own publishing imprint called Joy Revolution, which is a Random House imprint for young adults that is dedicated to love stories starring people of color. She grew up in Jamaica and Brooklyn and now lives in LA with her husband, who you also might know if you know books, the YA author David Yoon, and their daughter. And again, welcome, Nicola. So happy to have you.
That's a very nice introduction. It sounds like I do things. It's awesome.
I mean, most of that came from your own bio, so give yourself some credit here.
Yeah.
So I know most of you have, hopefully all, but at least most of you have read the book One of Our Kind. That was our September book and what we're here to discuss tonight. But just in case you haven't, all you need to know is that it was published in June of this year. It is a really fantastic thriller / satire / horror / everything about a Black woman named Jasmine who moves with her family into a very wealthy, all Black gated community called Liberty that's being marketed as a paradise. But as Jasmine quickly realizes, all is not what it seems. And it all culminates in a pretty wild ending, which we will definitely talk about later. So warning in
Oh
advance,
God.
there will be spoilers.
Yes.
Um,
Spoiler alert.
yeah, everyone here, I'm like, you got a month to read it. So if you didn't, that's that's your own risk you're taking right now.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm gonna first ask you a couple questions of my own and then switch into asking some of the questions that readers have sent my way. And again, if, as I mentioned, if you have questions that come up just now that you decide you want to ask Nicola, please raise your hand or post in the chat and I will make sure that you get the chance to ask them.
Yeah.
So yeah, starting off, my first question for you is, this is your first adult book after a very, very successful young adult career that for nearly a decade at this point. What made you decide to take that switch? To make that switch?
Yeah. So I mean, it's not quite a switch, right? I think that sometimes when I do interviews and stuff, everyone thinks that writers' careers are like super intentional, and I would say that it's not intentional. And you just sort of go where the art takes you, right? And so I had the idea for this book, um, and it was immediately an adult book. There was just no other way to write this book. And the themes, with just the age of the protagonist and what I wanted her life experience to be. It was definitely going to be an adult. Having said that, I'm on deadline for my next young adult right this second. So I'm definitely doing both. And what's luckily for me, like I've had enough success so far that I can sort of switch back and forth and sort of just go, like I say, where the inspiration is. And so that's nice. So this book just I had to write it. It's I think the book I felt most compelled to write in a weird way. I wrote the first draft in 6 weeks, which I am a very slow writer, so it usually takes me years and years. But the very first draft was 6 weeks, and then I took 3 years after that to revise it because, like, it just needed to be an actual book, right? But the bones of it, I wrote very, very quickly.
That's amazing. I mean, that is such a fast amount of time. I mean, as a
Listen,
writer
it's never
myself,
gonna happen again. Like that was it. One and that's
you
the only
say
time.
that. Well, I also can imagine that, the first, a new book, no matter what, a new book from a prominent author like yourself always is going to come with some high expectations from both readers and the publisher, I'm sure,
Mhm.
who've expected, they've learned to expect the best from your past. But I imagine that's even harder when you are tackling a genre or an audience that a little more unfamiliar than your past
Yeah.
work. Did you
Yeah.
feel any kind of pressure, or and if so, like how did you handle that?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's definitely pressure. There's always like, I mean, there's just always pressure. I mean, when we went out on submission, which was the, I wrote the first, I submitted the first act of this book when we were trying to sell it. And, we ended up going to auction for the book. And so that was wonderful. That meant a lot of publishers were interested. But we definitely got feedback from some publishers that didn't really want, a genre switch from me, right? Because the young adult books are so romantic. And they're coming of age stories. And this book is a horror thriller, and it's about race um, and some people just was not what they were wanting. But as I said, what's nice about this job is you get to do the thing you want. I used to have a terrible job before for 20 years, and I used to work in finance, and I have no desire to repeat that. So, I can only do the thing that like moves me, right? So like this book needed to get
Yeah.
written. And so I wrote it. And I have an idea for my next adult book, and it's also weird. And
Okay. Weird is good.
also,
Weird is a good
right. It's also like another like not to be expected genre thing, but you know, I gotta write the thing I gotta write.
Exactly, you gotta follow where the
Yeah.
story's going,
Yeah.
absolutely. I also wanted to ask, the whole mystery of the book, of course, revolves around the spa in the community. That seems as very early on, we realized this offers a lot more than just massages. Something
Yeah.
very fishy is going on there. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about how and why you landed on that idea of this kind of the spa really symbolizing and being a huge, part of this whole transformation the residents go through?
Yeah. So first I'll just say a funny thing about spas, which is that I actually did research spas. Um, and some of the things that you can get, like some of the treatments you can get are just so ridiculous. And I live in Los Angeles and Beverly Hills is right here. And it's crazy. People are crazy, like the things that they will pay for and the cost I mean, it's just wild. Um, but yeah, I mean, I really wanted to set it in a spa because I mean, I think we all exist in a world where you can wake up in the morning and the world is on fire, right? Like you just have to turn on the news and it feels like everything is burning down all at once. Um, and there's a few ways to react to that, right? You can be sort of like Jasmine, who is, she's basically very vigilant all the time. She's just like this, like a deer in headlights. Everything can go wrong at all the time. And therefore, I have to put my guards up and I have to be very judgmental. Um, the other scope of that is you can turn your sort of face away from the world and hide and not try to do something about it because it's overwhelming and it's just too much, right? I mean, I think that we probably all have felt that at one time or another, like both things, right? If you're a reasonably good person, when you walk down the street and someone is homeless, you want to fix it, right? But you cannot fix everything. Um, and so that can lead you to be like, well, I'm just going to throw my hands up and give up. Um, and so there's always a lot of talk about self-care too in our world. And it's usually like an individual self-care rather than sort of a community self-care that we talk about. And I really just wanted to explore that. Well, what does it mean to take care of yourself and, in the face of like atrocities do you want to just turn yourself away? I mean, that's totally understandable. And what I wanted to take it to like its a logical conclusion, just to the extreme, right? So that we could see our world. Like obviously that spa cannot exist, and it's
Yeah.
not something that I want to exist. Um, but one of the nice things about like science fiction or horror is that you get to push the boundaries so that you can see the current situation more clearly.
Absolutely. And that actually is a great seg into one of the first member questions of the night. This one I'm going to read from Diane, who I know is here tonight. Diane, I'm just going to unmute you. If you want to ask it yourself, please feel free. Otherwise, I will read it out loud for you.
I'll ask. So at the beginning of the book, it started out, kind of social justice and her really being empathetic and really feeling what was going on. At what point, or did you know right from the get-go it was going to turn into somewhat of a horror story, or was that your intent right from the get-go?
Yeah, and so I mean, I hear that question as being, did I always know the ending? And yes, I definitely always knew the ending. Right as soon as I thought of it, I knew what the ending would be. And I will be honest and say that I tried to write a different ending. Like I did actually try to write a happier ending, but it just wasn't true for these characters, and for this story, and for also what I wanted readers to take away, like the sort of self-examination and just sort of communicating with your friends and or in a book club that I wanted. Um, and it was a very painful ending to write. I will tell you that I revised it 1,000 times, and I would send it to my editor, and she would say, you are avoiding this ending. She's like, you have to just go back. And she was right, because I was trying to like I was like so scared of it. I was trying to write away from it and not like feel all the things. Um, and so I revised it so many times just to go deeper and deeper and to like just be really truthful with what I thought would happen to these characters and what I thought they would do and what would happen to them. Um, and Jasmine starts off, I mean, Jasmine is a product of a world you know, that has George Floyd happen, right? She is she's my most complicated character. She's so judgmental. She's kind of a pain, right? Like if I'm being honest, right? She's a pain in the butt in so many ways. Um, but I think she's a product of a world that is really painful for her to be in. And so I wanted to present someone like Jasmine as opposed to like some of the other people in Liberty who, in reacting to trauma, what they do is turn away from it.
Thank you for that answer. That was a great question, Diane, and a great answer.
Yeah, thank you, Diane.
And that actually leads perfectly into another member question. This one from Kathleen. Kathleen, I'm unmuting you. Same thing. If you want to ask it yourself, you are welcome to. Sorry, it was just taking a moment. Kathleen, is it letting me? Okay, yeah, Kathleen, you should be able to speak if you want to.
Yeah. So I thought the book was unbelievably thought-provoking, and actually the book poses so many questions, and the questions really can't even be answered. But one thing that struck me about the book was that the story powerfully addressed the idea of biological race, which is not supported by science, versus race as a social construct. So with this in mind, my overarching question to you is, what led you to write this book, and what were you feeling while you wrote the book?
Yeah. Yeah, I like your preface there. So this is kind of a long answer, so just sort of bear with me on this one because there are like three, like usually when writers get asked that question, we like have sort of an idea, but really the answer is we don't know, right? It's just in the air, and like one thing led to another, and we put it together because we write all the time. So it's a little bit of magic, right? But for this book, I actually do know some of the things that really led to it, and then some of it is magic. Um, so the first thing is I was out to dinner with a friend of mine, and he's Black and an activist. And we had done a panel on race and racism earlier in the day. And then we went to dinner, and we had some wine, and he said to me, he asked me a question. He said, "Do you ever wonder who you would be or who we'd all be as people if it weren't for the specter of race and racism?" It was one of those questions. It's very big. It's a great question, something I've been thinking about, for a long time, but also an impossible question, right? Like that's not what's the answer to that? Um, it's hard to tease apart who you would be if everything is different, right? And the thing I always say about this is that, it's like asking a fish to imagine a world without water. So we just kept drinking because we weren't going to answer that question. So like that was that that happened, and we sort of moved on. Um, and then the second thing is a quote from Toni Morrison that I've known since I was a kid, when she says the very real function of racism is distraction, and that it keeps you from doing your work, and it keeps you having to prove over and over again your reason for being. And I heard that when I was really young, and it had like a real sort of profound effect on me. It's one of those things where you go, oh, well, you just have to keep doing your work no matter what. It doesn't matter. Then you can just do what you need to do. Um, and then the third thing is I was in the shower and I was listening to a podcast. It's called You're Wrong About. And the hosts were talking about The Stepford Wives by Ira Levin, that book, which is just a fabulous book. And they were saying how everyone misremembers that book because everyone uses The Stepford Wives as like a cudgel to beat women over the head. They're like, you're such a Stepford wife. But actually, the book is really, really quite feminist, and it's about the men who would want their women to be Stepford wives, which I think I knew and didn't know. So then after I listened to that podcast, I actually read the book, and it's really just brilliant. Like there's not like a wasted word in this book, and it's such a fierce book. So all those things happened, and they're sort of in the background. And then we get to the summer of 2020 and George Floyd's murder. And I will say that I am a sunny sort of person and like fairly optimistic. Like I'm married to the love of my life and I have this great kid, and like I know how lucky I am. But that summer I definitely despaired. Like I was despairing. I was so sad and I was angry and sad, and I just sort of rotated between these two things for a long time. Um, and all those things I just talked about just sort of coalesced in my head, and I wrote the book. I was like compelled to write it, and so that's why I said it took 6 weeks. I knew how it was going to end. I knew so much of the basic structure of it, and so then I just put it together, and then it took another 3 years to like flesh it out and to talk about all the things I wanted to talk about, and make it into an actual book with actual people that you would care about. But that's the inspiration for the book. So that is actually the book I know the most about the inspiration for. Like I can tell you what everything's about, but I can't really tell you where the idea came from.
That makes total sense. And thank you for sharing all that. And thank you, Kathleen, for that question. I'm going to ask one of my own now that I think kind of, segs nicely into is I wanted to ask about, how Jasmine struggled throughout the book to kind of find out the truth of what's going on around her is especially poignant, at least in my opinion, because she's a mom and she knows she's not just trying to keep herself safe, but she's trying to keep both her young son as well as her soon to be child safe since she's pregnant.
Yeah.
And you're a mom yourself who is raising a biracial child in
Mhm.
today's world, the world you just described very well. did you evoke any of your own kind of concerns or fears in Jasmine's story?
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard because there's like there are two ways you want to protect your kid, right? If you're a parent or like a caretaker, right? Like there's like their physical safety, which is something that you're always concerned about, but there's also like the sort of psychic safety, like the way they're growing up in the world, the world is treating them, the way how curious they are, how loved they feel by like the world. Um, and you kind of have to try to balance both of those things. Like you don't want to take away too much innocence, but you don't actually want them running across the street without looking both ways too, right? So like there's a naivete, I guess, that you want to maintain, but also get it together. Please look both ways before you cross the street. Um, and so like I am always aware of that with my little girl, right? Like I am aware that she's not always seen as just being her, right? Like she's seen by the color of her skin first. And I know that I have to tell her that, but also not take away the way she loves the world, right? And not take away her innocence. Um, and I think that's something that, I think as a Black woman, I certainly have to balance. And I think we can all understand that anyway, right? Like you can all understand wanting to maintain your child's innocence, but also give them like a real clear-eyed view of the world. And so I really leaned into that when thinking about Jasmine. I think the character in the book who has the best sort of perspective on this is Trisha, right? Like she, is able to see the world, but also hold on to her joy. Where I think Jasmine is not able to do that, right? She just is bombarded by everything and she's not able to, her vigilance blinds her to some things.
Yeah, no, that means I can imagine. I'm not a parent myself, but I can imagine especially others who are, that like that rings so true to them too. And that's such a hard thing to do in the world, but I think you captured that really, really well. And I see we actually have a question coming in through chat from Nancy about the ending. And I know we will get, I'm going to save that, Nancy. I'm going to come back to that in a bit just because I definitely want to get into the ending, but I kind of want to lead up to that a little bit first. But I saw the question. I promise we will get to that. I wanted to ask a question that was submitted to me from Joel, where he said that when we first meet Jasmine, we don't really know much more about her than the fact of her activism and how passionate she is about her activism.
Mhm.
And obviously, as the book goes on, we get to see her personality, her interests, her background, a lot more, and making her feel like more and more human and three-dimensional and real, which feels almost in contrast to everyone else who's losing their realness in a sense because of the transformations they're going through. Was that contrast intentional for you?
Yeah, it's funny because like that's how you get to know people, right? Like you sort of know all of these big things and then you start to get to know the details of them. Um, and part of the book is like what actually makes you you, right? And like we have in the modern world, especially so many categories that we put each other into and we put ourselves into. I always call them boxes, like you check this box and this box and this box. And I think as like political people, that is useful, like as an organizing principle, maybe. But I don't know that I think it's useful as people, right? Because like in the end, my kid is my kid. Her name's Penny. And like because you know that she's biracial and all this other stuff, those are just a bunch of categories that you know. You still don't know her, right? Um, I think it would be lovely if we could just be like a category of one, like my name is Nikki. And that is like my identity. But that is not the world we live in, and I also don't think it's useful for organizing politically. So I understand the need for the categories, um, but there's a tension there that like always bugs me. But yeah, in the book, what you know about Jasmine is like she feels very passionately about all of this stuff, and then you get to know her that she's just a real person who's trying to get by the best she can. But part of the book is about what makes you you, and like if you are a Black person and you are not interested in social justice, are you still a Black person, and who gets to make that decision? Um, and the book does not offer answers, but I just wanted to point at the question over and over again and for us all to talk
Yeah.
about it, right? Like we talk about these categories that we've like sort of put people into and how that can force them into like these false choices, right? Like there's no real choice between paying attention to everything versus paying attention to nothing. Those are false categories, but that is the world that we have built in some ways.
Definitely, definitely. That absolutely rings very true. Um, yeah, I want to kind of now actually, it's a perfect time to seg into the talking about the ending a little more. I know, Nicola, of course, you already talked a little bit about kind of trying alternate versions of the ending, but feeling, ultimately that was the way you needed to go for the book. And I personally think it works very, very well. And I'm sure a lot of others agree here. But I would love to go back to Nancy. I'll unmute you in a moment to ask your question regarding the ending, and I may add one of my own afterwards.
Hi, and thank you. So I have a lot of questions about the ending and about the whole book. It's provocative and interesting, and thank you, Rachel, also for choosing it. I just retired from teaching middle school, so a lot of my students have read your books, and I've known you in that context.
Yeah.
Yeah, and very fondly. So, so I was thinking that in a lot of ways, this is also a commentary about segregated communities and whether those are good things or bad things, even if it's, a, a Black Beverly Hills, so that's sort of a separate question about whether how much um, how important that was to you thematically. And then the second piece, just about the ending, is in listening to you talk, it sounded to me almost like um, you felt like Jasmine and her resistance and her judgmentalism, but really her fierceness about wanting to get involved in the Black community was I don't was almost like part of why this happened to her. Is that am I reading that wrong, or is it just that by making her so fierce, the irony is stronger or the horror is stronger, and that she gets forced into this horrible thing? Um, and do you feel like there's anything that she could have done to avoid this ending? Um,
Yeah.
those are
Interesting questions.
Let me start with the second thing because it's fresher in my head. Yeah, I mean, I will say that the book is a tragedy, right? Like it's a terrible thing that happened to her. Um, I don't, as I say, I don't think there was another way to write that. Like, I don't think there was another ending that's true. And the job of a writer is to tell the truth, right? And I don't think that what I wanted to say was look at the world we have made that forces Jasmine into this position. Um, there are villains in this book, but there is a way to read them. And in fact, you should read them as victims as well, right? Like they've all been created by a system that's untenable. Like in the summer of 2020, we all watched George Floyd's body. That is inhuman. Like we should not be able to survive that. And yet we have to survive that, right? You have to be able to go on. You have to go get coffee and pick your kid up from the school, and you have to be able to do all of these things. Um, but what if you can't? What if it like that trauma just changes you and you just can't get by it? And what if you just want off the roller coaster ride? Um, and it's not to say that anyone should get off, but it's to say this world is kind of wild that we have built, right? It's to point at that question over and over again and say, why do we make it this way? What have we done? Like, shouldn't we do something else? Shouldn't we try? Um, as for Jasmine, I mean, what happens to her is that she is so vigilant all the time. She misses what's right in front of her, right? She misses that King is not great. And there were signs, right? And she misses what's happening. But in a world where you have to be constantly vigilant, that is what's going to happen. You won't know what what's true and what's false, who is your kind and who is not, because you've been pushed into this category. This person who's Black, that person is good, and that person is bad, and these false categories that are just like we have to get rid of them. We have to break out of them. We also have to break out of a society that would create them. Um, and so I would say that Jasmine just misses things because of the world she lives in, right? And she's not willing to turn away, but she also isn't willing to claim any space for herself or any joy for herself, right? like her friend Trisha is able to see the world and also able to love her husband and her kid and love all the things about the Black community. But Jasmine is the opposite, right? So like I put Jasmine on one end, I put people who turn away from the world on another end, and like Trisha is the one that's sort of in between. Um, so yeah, I will say that it was kind of in my mind, Jasmine's end was inevitable, and it is also a tragedy. Um, I think the other thing that's important to say is that the book is not prescriptive, right? Like, um, it's just meant to provoke questions, right? Like, I just want people to stay up all night reading it, maybe fling it across the room at the end, but then call your friend and talk about it and talk about, like, why does it end this way? Um, was there another way for Jasmine? Was there another situation that she could have? It couldn't have gone another way, but you guys could talk about it anyway. But then I forgot the first part of your question, Nancy, if you want to remind me.
Um, Hi. The first part was just about the idea of segregated communities and
Okay.
and how you think feel about that. We all think of like segregated communities, segregated schools, segregated classrooms, as being terrible, obviously, except I think there are also some Black communities that have been in favor of, for instance, all Black schools or classrooms or whatever. And it reminded me of, this all Black community that's supposed to be a good thing, but is actually a terrible thing. And so I guess I wonder how much you have thought about that and what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, so I definitely did some research into like utopias for this. And the thing I will say about all utopias is that they fail to a one. And sometimes they fail from within and sometimes they fail from without. I mean, my idea of utopia is that we all live together and we're happy, like all of us, like irrespective of all the categories that we put ourselves into. Um, but given that we don't live in that world, right? Like I understand why people would want to separate. So sometimes like self-segregate. Is that what I want? Me personally, absolutely not, right? Like my husband's Korean American and we have a biracial child and I have a lot of good friends. And this is not just me saying this, but I have a lot of good friends across every category you could, and my life is better for it, right? Like it just is, and it's not just because I get to eat all this fabulous food. It's just because like I get to just learn all these things and be with people, and like they have a different idea of the world than I do, and sometimes I change my mind and I don't know how else to be. Like I I I'm a curious person. I can't imagine shutting down. Which isn't to say that if you had a community that was like all like Jewish people from blah blah blah, that everyone would be the same, because that's not true either. But what we need is just for us all to live together. That to me is like the best thing, right? And I think the only way we get to a place like that is if we can have like honest conversations with each other, which is partly why I wrote the book, right? I really do want people to have conversations about race, but with a little bit more grace than we allow. Like our national discourse lacks empathy and lacks grace so much, right? We assume that the other person means the worst version of whatever it is they're saying. And, I say this all the time, but I actually think that most people will do the right thing if they know what the right thing is. And like, I'm not trying to be Pollyanna because I do think that some people are terrible and you should not talk to them. But most people are not terrible, right? Most people are willing to be open and to listen. And I think the only way things change is when like we are in a room together talking and you lean in and you listen and you believe someone else when they say, that hurts, or this is a thing that happened to me, and they believe you. Like I've had this experience where I've screwed up with people outside of my culture, blah blah blah, and they haven't abandoned me and said, Nikki, you're the worst, I don't want to talk to you. What they said is, Nikki, you're kind of dumb, here's the truth. And then because they know I love them, we can move on, you carry on, and your life is better for it. And the same thing has happened to me. There are people who have done dumb things, and I'm just like, get it together, woman. And then we talk about it, and then we move on, and it's better. And I don't see that there's any benefit to throwing people away. Like, I just, why? Like, you can't throw people away. Like, life is terrible that way. Um, so yeah, I mean, part of what the hope of the book is that we would, treat each other with a little bit more grace and lean in and not assume the worst thing about someone else. So, the last thing I'll say about Utopia too is that this is a very, very wealthy community, right? Um, I think in America we think that that means utopia, right? Like there's a way in which wealth is protective, but sometimes it's just not, right? Like I think that if you're Black and wealthy and you're walking down the street and you like, on a night with a cop that's in a bad mood or whatever, it's not going to protect you. Um, but I think Jasmine and company think that it would protect them, and I think a lot of the book is also about the ways in which what class can like separate you from like everyone, right? Not just from yourself, from your community. Um, and wealth can protect you sometimes, but not all the time.
Yeah, really, that's a really interesting answer. I think very thought provoking for a lot of people. And thank you, Nancy, for asking that, and Nicola for your answer. I see we have one question coming in from Kay that I believe is about the book, and then if we have time, I'll ask a few others that others submitted, not about the book itself. But Kay, I will give you the access to ask that in now.
Wow, I got unmuted. Wow.
The power.
Yeah, such power. Thank you, Rachel, for putting this together. This is so cool to get to talk to an author after reading a book. Nicola, I devoured your book in 2 days. I'm
Oh,
actually
yay.
not, I'm not even a member of the book club my husband is. And your book came and I was like, ooh, this looks interesting. And I just couldn't stop reading it. It was so propulsive.
Yay. I'm
Um,
happy to hear that.
yeah, I really enjoyed it. You were just speaking about wealth, which is exciting. That's actually what my question for you was about, when I was hoping you would talk a little bit more about, because I'm just curious. You mentioned you have experience working in the field of finance, which I didn't know about you in your biography. So I wonder how that informed the story as you wrote it. Like, as you said, wealth allows you to escape from these kinds of trauma.
Right.
But I
Yeah.
also noticed, like, it's almost kind of pointed in the book that, like, all of the people who founded Liberty have a common experience of, like, experiencing trauma at the hands of the police. So they're escaping trauma. So they're kind of sympathetic in a way, but a lot of the times, like, I don't think of very wealthy people using their wealth to escape as, like, having such a good reason for it. So I wondered if that, was something maybe informed by your experiences, or if you could share just a little bit more of your thinking about, like, how wealth complicates this and makes this kind of sticky.
Yeah. It's a really good question because I think when I talk about the book, we talk a lot about race, but so much of like the race conversation is actually a class conversation too. And I think we talk less about it in America, even though America is such a class conscious society. Like we think of England as being that way, but America is too, just a lot. There's so many divisions. And the way we separate by race is kind of interesting because actually like a wealthy Black person has more in common with a wealthy white person than someone like than with a wealthy or a poor white person, right? Because so much of America is about like how much money you have and what you can afford to do and how you can afford to care for your families. Um, but yeah, so I used to work in finance because I was really good at math in high school, and that led me astray. It basically led me to Wall Street for like 20 years, like in financial firms. So I used to basically get yelled at by supporting a trading desk for a long time. That was my job. Like my job was to get yelled at on a daily basis. It's terrible. Um, and it was all because of math. And so I saw I saw like very, very wealthy people, and not the good kind. And I live in LA, and Beverly Hills is right here. Um, it's 30 minutes from Beverly Hills and palatial houses to Skid Row and downtown. Um, and it's shocking to go from like one place to the other in the span of 30 minutes, right? Um, it just doesn't feel real. Like, how is it possible that we can have like these hedges that are, 20 feet high and behind which is a 10 million, 20, $30 million house, and also Skid Row with its tents and, people who are like barely hanging on. Um, but those houses in Beverly Hills, they are fortresses. Like nothing can get in there. They are protected, right? They are protected from everything else. I mean, during COVID, a lot of people retreated to compounds. They just like took everything and just went away, right? Like they were protected. So the book is about the wealth too. Like they wanted to get out of society, like they wanted to get away from racism, and they said, "We're going to make this place, and everything's going to be perfect because we have all the money to do all the things." But then, that obviously gets pierced because it's not real. That's not what they wanted to do. Not really. But they had like the space to do it, that little bubble to do it in. And so they weren't necessarily going to be wealthy because otherwise it honestly just wouldn't work in the book, right? Like you wouldn't be able to have the story without the money. But I did want to talk about like the class too, right? Like who gets to like turn away? Like you don't get to turn away if you're a working class, right? You just don't.
Yeah. No, that's a really great question, Kay, and really great answer from you, Nicola. Thank you for getting into all that. I think we're running a little short on time, but I have one more question I wanted to ask from one of our members. I'll let her ask it in a moment. Lisa, in regards to a very different topic, the basically kind of a fun question I know she had in terms of the names in the books. So, Lisa, you should be able to go right now.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you, Nicola. This has been very interesting. And my question is not quite as deep and thought-provoking as many of the others, but I'm always interested in how authors come up with names for the many characters in their books. Are they based upon people you know? Do you just kind of pick them out of a hat? Because there are so many. I mean, there's dozens and dozens of people in this book. So I'm just kind of curious as to your process for naming them.
I love this question. My husband, who's also an author, he's so intentional with his names. Like he spends days, like he like really agonizes. I don't at all, not even slightly. Like I'm just like, that sounds nice. I mean, a couple of the names in the book are like delivered, like Carlton Way, like the fact that his name is Way. It was partly like me saying he's going to show you the way, right? Um, but mostly I like will think for half an hour and I'll go through like a baby name. Like my daughter has this baby names book because she likes to write too, and I'll go through like the baby names book, and it just feels right. Like I can't keep going until the name feels right, but there's no sort of grand plan, right? Like if it just fits. Like I'm working on my next YA book, and I had a name that was just bugging me and bugging me, and then I was like, I can't do this, and then I changed it, and I was like, oh, she's unlocked. I know exactly who she is now, and it was the difference between an N and two L's, which is just weird but is also true.
Thank you. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And actually, that leads perfectly a note to one very last question I wanted to ask, which was kind of leading into more about your next book. You've mentioned tonight a couple times that you are working on that YA book and you're on deadline for that. I don't know how much you can reveal, but is there any information you can share about the direction that book's going in?
I mean, there's just a lot of kissing in it. Like I can say that. It's like an enormous amount of kissing. I got to spend the summer in England last year, so there's an English boy in it, I'll say.
That's a good combination, I think. Everyone
Kissing
loves an
and
English boy. So
right? That accent is ridiculous.
I saw that Mary Kate and Ashley movie when I was growing up, the one where they go to London for the class trip, you know. I got it. Well, yeah, I know there were, Nicola, if you have another 2 minutes, there's like a few more questions to ask, but if you need
Of
to run,
course, yeah, I'm totally fine. Like, yeah, I'm willing
amazing.
to answer whatever you want. Yeah.
You're the best. And if anyone here needs to run, understood. But otherwise, I had a really good question from Diane in regards to the audiobook process. I will let Diane ask that now.
Okay, so I listened to the book on audio, and my question is, do you get to pick who reads your book, or or is that something the publisher does? And how do you decide the voice, the actual voice of the person? And now that you've mentioned that your next book is going to be in England, will there be somebody with an English accent on that book?
You know, that's a good, I didn't even think of that. I never think about the audiobook until like it comes up and everyone's like, who are we choosing? But yeah, I mean, probably gonna need an English accent, right? Or maybe I'll get my husband to fake one. He's really good at it. Um, but for the audiobooks, you do get to choose, right? So like usually the publisher sends me a list of like voice actors, and then I listen to them and then choose the person that I feel like embodies the story. And for my young adult books, it's all been the same person. Her name is Bonnie Turpin, and she does a great job. And for the adult book, I chose someone whose name just went out of my head, but just from listening to a bunch of samples, and also I just wanted to differentiate between like the sort of adult stuff and the young adult stuff. And it's just once again, it's just one of those things that was a feeling. I think I was on a road trip to Palm Springs when the email came through, and I played it through the car radio. Of like my daughter was in the car, and David, my husband, was in the car, and we all chose the same person, and we're like, "That's the voice." And then I emailed back.
Cool. That is, I'm interested in that too. And yeah, thank you for that question, Diane. Because like I know as an author myself, when my book, they were doing the audio book, you know, I got to pick from just a group of people and say this one sounds good. But I do know, yeah, with some other books, depending on the author and the book, it can be a very rigorous process and really make a big difference. So it's always
Can
cool
I
to get
tell
that
you a
behind the
funny
scenes.
Can I tell you a funny story about everything,
Please.
everything? Like I chose, Bonnie, and then I got to go into the studio because she was recording in Los Angeles. And so David and I went into the studio, and it was like the day that she was reading the one like sexy scene in the book. And it's like a fade to black scene, but it was still just like too sexy. It was so embarrassing to listen to her read those words. I was just like wanted to die. And then never gone back to watch a recording since then.
I think that it's probably even worse than just like listening to your own voice on a transcription or something.
Yeah,
That seems like it
it
would be
was
painful.
terrible. It was terrible. Like, oh my God, please.
Well, speaking of some of your past book there, I had a question from Daisy, who I don't believe I'm just scanning the list, but no, I don't see her here tonight, so I'll ask it about, she was very interested in how kind of throughout a lot of your books, you've added different perspectives and, POVs in from inanimate objects, even like the Diary of the Cheesecake or the concept of love, even.
Mhm.
What makes you kind of think to do this? And, I know you've done that, in several YA books.
Yeah, I don't know. For some reason, I like breaking the form, like of the novel when I'm writing. I don't know why. I think also I'm quite shallow, so like I just keep myself entertained, right? Like because I still have to write this thing, and it takes forever to write books, right? And so, um, I mean, for everything, it was, you know, my main character is stuck in her house, and I think that if you're stuck in your house, you would want to reach out to the world. And so I had her be an artist and read a lot of books and write reviews, and it just sort of naturally fit. And the sun is also a star is about the connections between people and the way that your life affects a stranger and the way a stranger's life affects you, even if you don't know it. And so I wanted to show their points of view as well. Um, so it just sort of made sense. I think I just interested in connections and sort of serendipity. In instructions for dancing, like the main character can see what happens to everyone else's relationship. So if she sees a couple kiss, she sees the beginning, middle, and inevitable end of their relationship. And so I just went into those I would show that little sort of image or like movie that played in her head. And obviously in One of Our Kind, you got sort of the other points of view. I just like to do it. I like a book that has many different forms in it. I think it's just my particular quirk. And also, it also is the things I'm interested in. I am interested in their life on the page and their life outside of the page too, and what I can bring to it. Um, yeah, and also I'm shallow. I don't know what to say.
There's nothing wrong with wanting to keep yourself entertained as you write, because also you're your own best reader. You know, if you're
Right.
entertained, good chance other people are going to be too.
Right, yeah, and you got to read this book a million times, so
Yes.
you
Oh my
might
God,
as well
that's
be
I know is the
entertained.
worst. Everything you
Yeah,
think when you think you're brilliant, you read it over again and you're like, I'm the worst writer ever, and vice versa. When you're like,
yes.
this all is awful, and you're like, okay, maybe I'm pretty good at
That's not
this.
bad. That's not bad. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, one last question from a reader, Nick, who is not here tonight. He was talking specifically about The Sun is Also a Star, but I actually want to kind of broaden this. He said, first of all, that it's an amazing book, which I
Oh
definitely
yeah.
agree. But I also, he asked about kind of, how long did it take you to write it and what your process was like? I know the general, what your writing process is like is a very complicated kind of, hard question for writers to
Mhm,
answer sometimes. But I'm curious if like, you mentioned with One of Our Kind that it took you that 6 weeks plus the 3 years of editing.
mhm.
Is there an average for you or kind of a norm for when you are setting out to write a new book about how long it takes and kind of the steps you have to go through for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, they've all been so different. Like everything. I still had my full-time job. So I wrote that one from 4 to 6 a.m. over the course of 3 years, right? And I was a new mom. So like I would wake up, like breastfeed, and then write for a couple hours and then go to work. And that one took 3 years to do it that way. And then The Sun is Also a Star took about a year and a half or two. And I also write by hand. So I like
Mm,
just gonna grab one of these notebooks here. Like I write into notebooks, so like these like
mm,
moleskins, and so like this is my messy, terrible handwriting. Um, and so that process makes it take a little bit longer because I can't, for some reason, can't type the first draft. I have to write it down, and I think it's because it short circuits my brain a little bit. Otherwise, I'm like constantly editing myself. But if it's just a notebook and a blank page and like me and my like little fountain pen, it doesn't matter, right? You can write whatever weird thing you want because you can always just cross it out. So it's like tricks myself into like not editing myself in those sort of very, very precious beginning stages. Because at the
mm,
beginning of writing a book, like you really want to be open to all the ideas, all the weirder the idea, the better. You just want to sort of get it all in there. And then at the editing stage, then you need to start shaping and pairing. And I feel like that's when I move to the computer and I feel like that's okay then. But that's how I do it. Instructions for Dancing, I think, was another. I actually wrote a book that failed before Instructions for Dancing. So meaning it just never came together. Like I have an entire book, but my
mm.
mom was really sick at the time, and I wrote most of that book honestly in a hospital, and there's just no hope in it. There's no daylight in it, and it just never worked. And so then after that, I wrote Instructions for Dancing. So the book itself took 2 years, but the whole process was like four. Um, and then One of My Kind I've already talked about. So yeah, they take such a different amount of time depending. This one, the YA I'm writing right now is going pretty well actually. So I mean, knock on wood, it won't take 100 years to finish.
Hey, whatever it takes, I'm sure it'll be worth it. Well, thank you so, so much for being here tonight, Nicola, and just giving such thoughtful answers. And thank you all, everyone being here who joined in. It was so great to hear some of your questions and just really appreciate you taking the time. So a little round of applause for us all. We can do. I know I have everyone muted. I'm sorry. So now it's just not for me.
But I really want to, well, thank you for having me on. And then thank you guys for taking the time and asking really thoughtful questions. It's like you know, it's a lot in this book, and I appreciate you like engaging with it thoughtfully and chatting because, as I say, this is how stuff like changes, right?
Definitely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's such a great book to start out Beyond the Book with. And on that note, just right before we wrap up, I just want to remind you all that if you did enjoy tonight and you want more like this, please spread the word of Beyond the Book to your friends, family. If you know people who you think would be interested, we do these every single month. Nicola just happened to be our very first one, which was wonderful. But we're going to get into authors of all different genres and really have some very exciting conversations going forward and get their new books for you all to read. So please spread the word. Again, there's a referral bonus if you get a new member to join. And if you have any questions, anything, reach out to me. I'm happy to answer. All right, everyone. Thank you again. And I hope you all have a wonderful night.
Thanks, Rachel. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Bye, Nicola. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
of course. Bye.